The smoke was already thick enough to sting the eyes. People stood in the street, frozen, their voices rising in panic. Some shouted warnings, others fumbled with phones to call for help. And right in the middle of it all, Michael was moving the wrong way. While everyone else was backing away from the house, he was walking straight toward it. Faster now. Then running. And here's the part that made neighbors whisper for weeks afterward. He wasn't running in for a person. He was running for a dog. A golden retriever. A stranger's golden retriever. The windows spat sparks. The curtains were already burning. The air was heavy with the kind of heat that makes your skin prickle even from a distance. People shouted, "Stop! You'll never make it!" But Michael kept going. His lungs screamed at him to turn back, but he didn't. Why? Why would a 68-year-old retired firefighter, long past his active days, throw himself into the flames for an animal he barely knew? That question would haunt the neighborhood for months. And the answer, well, it wasn't just about bravery. It wasn't even just about the dog. It was something deeper. Something Michael himself didn't understand, at least not until Daisy, that golden retriever, showed him. Because what Daisy did when he carried her out of that fire was something no one could have expected. And it began on a morning so ordinary, it almost seems impossible that it would end with fire, smoke, and destiny colliding on a suburban street. Michael had woken up the same as he always did. A cup of black coffee. The quiet creak of his porch chair. A newspaper folded neatly in his hands. The sun was low, soft light spilling across the lawn. Routine. Predictable. Safe. He'd worked his whole life inside chaos, fire alarms, shouting voices, rushing engines. And when he finally retired, he promised himself, no more. The quiet life was his reward. A simple morning. A simple day. And yet, even as he sat there, sipping coffee, he noticed her. The golden retriever. Daisy. She was sitting 2 houses down, on the porch of the widow who'd moved in last year. Daisy had that way about her, eyes wide, head tilted slightly, as though she was always listening. Always waiting for something more. Michael had never spoken much with the widow. He didn't even know her first name. But Daisy, she was impossible to ignore. Every morning, she was there. Wagging her tail whenever she caught his eye. As though she saw something in him he no longer believed existed. He nodded at her, like he always did. She barked once, a small sound, almost like a greeting. He smiled, folded his paper, and thought nothing of it. That was the last peaceful morning before the fire. Later that same day, Michael found himself walking past the widow's home. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and gasoline from a neighbor's mower. Children's laughter floated from down the street. Just another afternoon. And then, chaos. A scream. Sharp, desperate, shattering. Help! The dog's inside. Michael turned. Smoke was curling from a window. Thin at first, then thicker, blacker, rising fast. Flames licked the curtains. The sound of glass popping echoed like gunfire. Neighbors swarmed the yard, their faces pale, their hands covering mouths. "Call the fire department," someone yelled. Another voice cried, "The dog's trapped." Michael froze. For a moment, just a moment, he was back there. Back in the blaze that had haunted him for years. A fire from long ago. One he'd never been able to forget. He'd promised himself he would never again run into fire. His body wasn't the same. His hands trembled too easily. His lungs couldn't take the smoke. He wasn't strong enough. Not anymore. And yet, through the window's haze, he saw movement. Golden fur. Daisy. Her paws pressed against the glass. Her eyes locked on his. And in that second, something clicked inside him. Michael didn't think. He didn't calculate. He didn't hesitate. His feet were already pounding across the yard, his body already throwing itself forward, into the choking smoke and blistering heat. "Michael," someone shouted. "Don't do it!" But he didn't turn. He couldn't. Inside, the heat slammed him like a wall. The air was so thick it clawed his throat. The crackle of fire roared in his ears. Furniture toppled. The floor groaned under his boots. He pulled his shirt over his mouth, but the smoke clawed deeper, hotter. "Daisy," he shouted, his voice muffled and raw. A whimper answered. Faint. Muffled. But there. He staggered toward the sound, one hand dragging along the wall. The smoke was black now, alive, twisting. Each breath burned. His vision blurred. And then, he saw her. Daisy. Trapped. A wooden beam had fallen, pinning her by the collar against the floor. She was trembling, pawing weakly, eyes wide. Michael dropped to his knees, coughing. His fingers clawed at the beam. Too heavy. Too hot. His shoulders screamed with pain as he tried again. He could leave. He could turn back. He could save himself. But her eyes. Those eyes. They weren't pleading. They weren't panicked. They were trusting. As though she knew, without question, that he would not leave her. Michael gritted his teeth, sucked in what air he could, and heaved. Muscles strained, skin seared, his body threatening to give way. And then, the beam shifted. Daisy wriggled free. He scooped her up, pressed her against his chest, and stumbled back through the smoke. His lungs begged him to stop. His legs wobbled. The house cracked and roared above him. And then, daylight. Fresh air. The roar of neighbors. Hands reaching for him. Michael collapsed to the ground, Daisy clutched in his arms. She scrambled to her paws, shook once, then turned back to him. And in front of the whole street, she did something that stunned everyone. Instead of bolting, instead of cowering, Daisy pressed herself against Michael's chest. She licked his burned hands, whimpered softly, and refused to leave his side. The neighbors went silent. Someone whispered, "It's like she knows." And in Michael's chest, where fear and regret had lived for decades, something shifted. Because this wasn't just a rescue. This wasn't just luck. This was the beginning of something else. And later, he would realize. Daisy hadn't only been saved that day. She had saved him too. But that realization was still far away. For now, all Michael could do was gasp for breath, clutch his scorched hands, and stare at the dog who had refused to let go of him. And even then, he didn't yet know what Daisy was about to show him. Because what happened after the fire would prove beyond doubt that animals sometimes understand far more than we imagine. Michael sat on the curb, his chest heaving, every breath rasping like sandpaper in his throat. His arms trembled. His shirt was scorched, his skin blistered in patches. But through the blur of pain, he felt weight. Not the beam that had pinned Daisy, not the crushing heat of the fire, but the gentle pressure of fur against his leg. Daisy. She wasn't running away. She wasn't trembling in terror. She was right there, pressed against him, eyes wide and steady, as though she had chosen him in that moment, chosen him as her anchor in the chaos. Neighbors murmured in disbelief. A young boy whispered, "It's like she knows what he did." Michael coughed, his throat raw, and looked at her. And a strange thing happened. For a brief instant, the roar of sirens, the cries of neighbors, even the sting of his burns faded into the background. All he could feel was her gaze, unwavering, holding his. And it wasn't gratitude alone. No. It was something else. Something he couldn't quite name. The paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher. His vision swam, his head pounded. Yet even as they strapped him in, Daisy whined and tried to climb up beside him. The widow rushed forward, her face streaked with tears, clutching Daisy's collar. "She won't leave him," she cried, pulling at the dog who strained toward Michael. The paramedic shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen a dog act like that." Michael coughed again, his voice hoarse, and forced out a rasping whisper. "Let her, it's okay. Let her stay." And so Daisy padded alongside the stretcher, her tail low but wagging faintly, her eyes never leaving his. The hospital lights were harsh, white, unforgiving. Machines beeped steadily, a rhythm that echoed in Michael's half-dreaming mind. His burns weren't life-threatening, but they throbbed with every heartbeat. His lungs were raw, each breath a reminder of the smoke. He expected to wake to the loneliness of sterile walls. Instead, when he blinked his eyes open, he saw golden fur curled by his bedside. Daisy, her head resting on her paws, breathing slow, steady, calm. Someone must have pulled strings to let her in. Maybe the widow, maybe the paramedics. But there she was, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Michael stared at her. Something inside him stirred, something he had buried long ago. Because Daisy wasn't just a dog. She was a reminder. A living, breathing mirror of a night decades earlier. Years ago, when Michael was still in his prime, there had been another fire. Bigger. Hotter. A family trapped inside. He remembered every second of it, though he had tried to forget. He had made it to the second floor. He had pulled the mother and 2 children out. But one child, the youngest, he hadn't reached in time. The fire consumed the room before he could push through. And though everyone told him he had saved lives that night, Michael never heard the praise. All he remembered were the cries of the father as the reality sank in. All he remembered was the feeling of failure. That failure had lived inside him like a splinter. Sharp. Invisible. Always there. And now, decades later, here he was. Smoke still in his lungs. A dog's eyes still staring at him. And the feeling was the same. He had gone in for Daisy the way he had once gone in for that child. The difference was, this time, he had carried her out. But the past doesn't loosen its grip so easily. Michael reached a bandaged hand toward Daisy. She lifted her head and pressed her muzzle gently against him, her tail wagging once, softly, as though to say, "You did enough." He felt his throat tighten. For years, he had never allowed himself to believe that. Neighbors visited him over the following days. Some brought flowers, some food, all bringing gratitude. "You're a hero," they said. "If you hadn't gone in." Michael forced polite smiles. But inside, the word hero still rang hollow. He didn't feel like one. He felt like a man still trying to undo a mistake he couldn't erase. And yet, every time the doubt rose, he felt Daisy's eyes on him. Constant. Steady. By the 3rd day, the widow came to visit properly. She was a soft-spoken woman in her 60s, gray hair tied back neatly, hands folded nervously. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice trembling. "She's all I have left. When my husband passed, Daisy, she's the reason I get out of bed. If you hadn't..." Her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Michael shook his head gently. "Don't thank me. I just did what anyone would have done." But she looked at him, tears in her eyes, and said quietly, "No. Not everyone would have. Only someone who still carries fire in their heart." Those words stayed with him long after she left. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat up in bed, staring at the pale hospital wall. Daisy lifted her head, ears twitching, then patted closer until her chin rested on the edge of his mattress. Michael sighed, running his fingers gently through her fur. "Why'd you make me go in there, huh?" he whispered. "Why you?" She blinked slowly, as though answering without words. He closed his eyes, leaning back, memories swirling. He thought of the child's face he never saved. He thought of the father's broken voice. And then he thought of Daisy's steady gaze through the smoke, as if she had chosen him not just to save her, but to face himself again. And the thought unsettled him. Because what if Daisy had been more than just a dog in need? What if she was a kind of second chance? Days stretched into a week. Michael's burns began to heal. His strength returned slowly. And every morning, Daisy was there, waiting, watching, never letting him feel alone. The nurses adored her. Patients smiled when she padded down the hall. She had a calming presence, as though she carried a secret purpose. And Michael began to wonder. Because deep inside, he felt it, this story wasn't finished. The fire had been only the beginning. He could sense it in Daisy's eyes. Something was still coming. Something he couldn't explain. The hospital discharged Michael sooner than expected. The burns on his hands were healing, though still raw, and his cough lingered like a shadow of the fire. The doctors warned him to rest. To take things slowly. But there was no slowing Daisy. From the moment he stepped back onto his porch, cane in hand, she was there. Sitting in the grass, tail swishing like a broom across the lawn. She had no leash, no command to stay. She simply was. Waiting. The widow apologized at first. "She doesn't want to leave your side. I keep trying to pull her home, but she slips the leash. She cries if I close the door." Michael shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's all right. She can stay." And so Daisy did. It became routine. Every morning, Michael would shuffle outside with his coffee and paper, and Daisy would plop herself down at his feet as if she had always belonged there. Every evening, when the sun burned orange and the air cooled, she would walk beside him down the quiet streets, never pulling, never straying. Neighbors noticed. They waved, sometimes stopped to chat. "She's chosen you," one said. "Dogs know. They always know." Michael chuckled politely, but inside, those words struck a deeper chord. Chosen. What did that mean? Because the more time he spent with Daisy, the stranger it seemed. She wasn't just loyal. She was purposeful. Almost watchful. And sometimes, she would fix her gaze on him with such intensity, such quiet knowing, that Michael found himself looking away first. One evening, as cicadas buzzed and shadows stretched long, Michael sat in his chair and Daisy lifted her head suddenly. Her ears twitched, nose sniffing at the air. She whined softly, then turned her gaze toward the distance. Michael followed her eyes. Past the rooftops, past the tree line, toward the faint silhouette of the town cemetery on the hill. A shiver ran through him. He shook his head. "Not tonight, girl. Not there." But Daisy kept staring. Michael tried to ignore it, but Daisy's odd behavior grew. At times, she would pause mid-walk and stare down the street as though waiting for something unseen. Other times, she would press against his legs and refuse to move forward until he acknowledged her with a hand on her head. It unnerved him, if he was honest. He had owned dogs before. Loyal, affectionate, eager companions. But Daisy felt different. She wasn't just following him. She was leading him somewhere. The question was, where? One afternoon, Michael sat with the widow on her porch. She poured him tea, her hands still trembling faintly when she set the cups down. "I still wake up in the night," she admitted, eyes downcast. "Dreaming of the flames. I think, if you hadn't been there, I would have lost her. And then I'd have lost myself." Michael said nothing at first. He was staring at Daisy, who lay at his feet, tail thumping lightly. Finally, he spoke. "She's more than a dog. You see it too, don't you?" The widow glanced at him, uncertain. "What do you mean?" "She looks at me like she knows things. Like she's carrying something. I can't explain it." The widow smiled faintly, her eyes shining. "Maybe she does. Some souls are born to guide others." The words lingered. Guide. Chosen. Destiny. Michael wanted to dismiss them as sentiment. But Daisy's eyes wouldn't let him. That night, Michael dreamed. He was back in the fire of years ago, smoke clawing at his lungs, the child's voice echoing faintly. But when he turned, it wasn't a child's face staring through the haze. It was Daisy's. Her eyes, steady, unwavering, locking on his. He woke in a cold sweat, the sound of her soft breathing beside his chair. She lifted her head, ears perked, as if she knew. And in that moment, he whispered aloud, "Why you? Why now?" Daisy blinked slowly, then laid her head back down. Weeks passed. Michael grew stronger. His burns faded into scars. His cough softened. But Daisy never left. The bond between them was undeniable now. The widow had stopped trying to call her home. "She's yours as much as mine," she said one morning, smiling wistfully. Michael shook his head. "No. She belongs to herself. She's just letting me walk beside her." Yet deep down, he felt something else. A pull. As though Daisy had been sent, not just to survive, but to remind him of something unfinished. And then came the evening that sealed his suspicion. It was late, the street quiet. Michael had dozed off on his porch when Daisy's sudden bark jolted him awake. She wasn't alarmed, her bark was sharp, urgent, insistent. She trotted down the walkway, then stopped, glancing back at him. "Where are you going, girl?" he muttered, rubbing his eyes. She barked again, wagged her tail once, and waited. Michael stood, joints aching, cane tapping on the ground. All right, I'm coming." She led him, steady and sure, through the neighborhood. Past familiar streets. Past the corner store. Past the playground where children's swings creaked in the wind. And then, toward the hill. The cemetery. Michael froze at the bottom of the slope. His chest tightened. His grip on the cane whitened. "No," he whispered. "Not there." But Daisy turned, ears perked, eyes fixed on him. She whined softly, almost pleading. Something in his chest cracked. He had avoided that place for decades. Avoided the memories. Avoided the grave of the child he hadn't saved. But Daisy was insistent. And Michael knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. This was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. He didn't climb the hill that night. His legs felt heavy, his heart heavier. He turned back, cane trembling in his hand. Daisy followed reluctantly, glancing back at the slope again and again. Michael sat on his porch long after midnight, staring into the dark, Daisy's head resting on his knee. He whispered into the quiet, his voice hoarse. "What are you trying to show me?" Daisy's tail tapped once against the floorboards. And in her eyes, he thought he saw the answer. Not tonight. Not yet. But soon. And so the stage was set. The bond between man and dog had deepened into something neither fully understood. And beneath the surface of ordinary days, the threads of destiny were pulling tighter. Because Michael's past hadn't finished with him. And Daisy wasn't done leading him. Michael tried to convince himself it was nothing. A dog's instincts. A random pull of curiosity. That was all. But the truth was harder to ignore. Daisy had gone straight to the hill. The cemetery. The very place he had sworn never to set foot again. And ever since that night, she hadn't stopped watching him. In the mornings, she would sit at the edge of his porch, staring toward the distant rise of gravestones. In the evenings, when the shadows grew long, she would whine softly, her head tilted in that same direction. It was as if she were waiting for him to follow. Michael told himself he wouldn't. He couldn't. He had lived almost 30 years without setting eyes on that grave. 30 years of carrying the weight silently, burying it beneath routine and quiet solitude. But Daisy's eyes were relentless. One afternoon, the widow came to sit with him. She had brought a basket of biscuits, her hands folding and unfolding nervously as she placed them on the table. "She still wants to be near you," she said softly, nodding toward Daisy curled at his feet. "It's like she belongs more to you than me now." Michael shook his head. "No. She doesn't belong to anyone." The widow studied him for a long moment. "She's guiding you." The words landed heavy. Michael stiffened. "Guiding me where?" The widow's eyes softened. "Maybe back to where you were broken." Michael said nothing. But his silence was answer enough. That night, Michael dreamed again. The fire roared in his ears, louder than thunder. Smoke twisted in black ribbons, choking, searing. And again, the child's face flickered in the haze. A boy no older than 7. The boy he hadn't reached in time. But this time, Daisy stood beside him in the dream. Barking once. Strong. Urgent. Her eyes cutting through the smoke. Michael jolted awake, his chest tight, the old ache in his heart swelling like a wound that had never healed. Daisy was lying on the floorboards, her head resting on her paws, her gaze fixed on him. He whispered into the dark, voice cracking, "You don't know what you're asking of me." But deep down, he knew she did. The following evening, Daisy rose suddenly during their walk and tugged gently toward the cemetery road again. This time, Michael didn't stop her. His cane tapped against the pavement, his breath uneven as the hill loomed closer. Each step felt heavier, as though chains wrapped around his ankles. The street was quiet, the air thick with late summer heat. At the base of the hill, he froze. The cemetery gates yawned open, dark iron against fading sky. Rows of stones stretched beyond, gray and solemn. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and something older, something heavier. Daisy whined, her tail wagging once, then she padded ahead through the gates. Michael gripped the iron post, his knuckles white. His legs trembled. His heart hammered against his ribs. Not tonight. Not yet. He turned sharply, almost stumbling as he pulled himself back down the street. Daisy stopped, watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. Michael muttered, "I can't." But the look in her eyes told him this wasn't over. The next few days were restless. Michael couldn't sit still. couldn't sleep more than an hour without the dream returning. Neighbors noticed his gaunt face, his distracted eyes. "You all right, Michael?" they asked. He forced smiles. "Just tired." But Daisy knew better. She never left him. Always there, pressing her head into his hand when he sighed, watching him with those eyes that seemed to see past flesh and bone, into the very soul. And the more he resisted, the clearer it became. She wouldn't stop. Not until he faced it. One evening, the widow stopped by again, bringing a loaf of fresh bread. As they shared slices at his table, Daisy lay between them, tail thumping gently against the floorboards. The widow spoke softly. "I've seen that look before. The look in your eyes. My husband had it after the war. Carrying memories he wouldn't talk about. Memories that ate at him. You can't bury those forever, Michael. They don't stay buried." Michael swallowed hard, staring at the scarred skin on his hands. "I couldn't save him," he said finally, the words trembling as they broke free. "A boy. 7 years old. I pulled the others out, but I didn't make it back for him. His father's screams, they've never left me." The widow reached across the table, her hand brushing his arm. "That wasn't your fault." Michael shook his head. "Try telling that to the boy's grave." The silence that followed was thick, unspoken, heavy. Daisy lifted her head, ears perked, and let out a single soft bark. As though agreeing. As though pointing the way. That night, Michael didn't dream. He lay awake instead, staring at the ceiling, Daisy breathing softly on the floor nearby. And slowly, the realization settled. He could keep running. Keep turning away. But Daisy wouldn't let him. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't want her to. The next morning, he rose early. The sky was pale, the air cool. He took his cane, stepped onto the porch, and found Daisy already waiting at the gate. Tail wagging once, steady and calm. He sighed. "All right, girl. Lead the way." She patted ahead, her gait confident, sure. Michael followed, his steps slow, deliberate, but steady. Through the quiet streets. Past the corner store. Past the park. Past the lives of neighbors going about their mornings, unaware of the stone building in his chest. And then, once again, the cemetery gates loomed. This time, he didn't stop at the edge. His legs trembled as he stepped inside, the crunch of gravel loud beneath his shoes. Daisy walked ahead, weaving between rows of stones, her nose low, her ears twitching. Michael's breath caught in his throat. His hands shook. Every step was a battle. Every stone he passed felt like a weight pressing heavier on his chest. And then Daisy stopped. She sat down quietly before a small headstone, weathered by time. The name was faint, but Michael didn't need to read it. He knew. He had always known. It was the boy's grave. Michael's knees buckled. He gripped his cane until his hand ached, then slowly lowered himself to the grass. His breath broke into ragged sobs. Daisy leaned against him, silent, steady, her eyes fixed on him with that same knowing gaze. And in that moment, the weight of 30 years came crashing down. But even there, even in his grief, Michael didn't yet realize the full meaning of Daisy's presence. Because what she had led him to that morning was only the beginning of what she would reveal. Michael stayed kneeling at the grave until his legs ached. His cane had slipped to the ground beside him, but he didn't care. 30 years of silence poured out of him in jagged breaths, his hands trembling as he touched the rough edges of the stone. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking, almost swallowed by the stillness of the cemetery. "God help me, I'm so sorry." The wind stirred faintly, brushing through the grass. Daisy pressed closer, her warm body anchoring him to the earth as though reminding him, "You are still here." The memories came like a flood. The choking smoke. The roar of flames. The boy's voice, faint but desperate, crying out from behind a collapsing door. Michael had made the decision, drag 2 children out first, then go back. But when he returned, the building had caved in. Too late. Always too late. He had lived with that moment every day since. It shaped the lines in his face, the slope of his shoulders, the hollowness behind his eyes. He had built walls around it, silent fortresses of guilt. But now, with Daisy sitting quietly beside him, those walls were cracking. Hours seemed to pass. The sky shifted from pale morning to a wash of late afternoon gold. Michael finally drew a long breath, lifting his head to truly look at the stone. The name carved there was faint, nearly lost to time, but he traced it gently with one finger. The boy's name. A name Michael had not dared speak in 30 years. His throat tightened as he whispered it aloud. For the first time since that fire, the sound of it did not break him completely. Instead, it loosened something inside. He realized then, the boy was no longer only a memory of failure. He was also a memory of love. Of innocence. Of a life worth grieving, worth honoring. And somehow, Daisy had known exactly where to bring him. That thought unsettled him. Dogs could sense grief, yes. They could smell illness, predict storms. But how could Daisy have led him here, to this exact place? To a grave unmarked in his daily life, a grave he had never spoken of aloud? Michael studied her as she lay at his side, her golden fur glowing faintly in the sinking sun. She wasn't restless, wasn't distracted. She simply waited, her eyes locked on him as though this was the moment she had been guiding him toward all along. Something stirred in Michael's chest, fear, awe, and an ache that felt almost holy. As evening drew near, Michael rose unsteadily, leaning heavily on his cane. His legs felt like stone, but his heart, though raw, felt lighter than it had in decades. "Thank you," he whispered to Daisy, though he wasn't sure whether he meant the words for her or for the silent boy beneath the earth. Together, they left the cemetery. That night, Michael dreamed again. But this time, it was different. There was fire, yes, but faint, a flicker rather than a storm. The smoke curled softly, almost fading away. And in the dream, he saw the boy again. But not crying. Not afraid. The boy was smiling. And standing beside the boy, was Daisy. Her eyes glowed in the dimness, her stance firm and unyielding. She barked once, but it wasn't a warning. It was almost a greeting. Michael woke with tears on his cheeks. His room was quiet, Daisy sleeping peacefully at the foot of the bed. He sat up slowly, whispering into the dark, "Who are you, girl?" The days that followed felt strange, as though the world had shifted slightly on its axis. Michael went about his routines, morning coffee, tending the small garden, short walks into town, but everything felt more vivid, sharper. Colors seemed deeper, sounds clearer. And Daisy seemed changed too. She stayed near him always, yes, but her presence felt heavier, as though she carried not only her own spirit but something more. Sometimes, he would catch her staring at him with eyes so steady, so ancient, he swore for a moment she wasn't a dog at all but something older. Something that had been waiting for him for a very long time. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sun sink low, the widow came again. She sat quietly beside him, no basket this time, only her gentle presence. Michael told her everything. He told her about the fire. About the boy. About the grave Daisy had led him to. About the dream. His voice shook, broke, but he spoke anyway. For the first time, he spoke without hiding. When he finished, the widow reached over and clasped his hand. "You were never meant to carry that alone," she whispered. Michael swallowed hard. His eyes dropped to Daisy at their feet, curled like a sentinel, her breathing slow, steady. "Maybe I wasn't carrying it alone," he murmured. The widow followed his gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. And then, softly, she said, "Sometimes, angels don't come with wings." The words lodged deep in Michael's heart. Could it be true? Could Daisy be more than chance, more than coincidence? Could she be something sent, not just for companionship, but for redemption? The thought both comforted and unsettled him. That night, the dream returned once more. This time, there was no fire. Only a meadow bathed in warm light. The boy ran freely, laughing, his hair golden in the sun. Daisy ran beside him, her tail wagging, her body strong and whole. And Michael stood watching, tears in his eyes, as the boy turned to him and smiled. In that smile, Michael felt forgiveness. When he awoke, his pillow was damp with tears, but his heart felt strangely whole, as though some part of the burden had finally lifted. Yet, even with this newfound peace, questions lingered. Why Daisy? Why now, after 30 years? Michael didn't have the answers. But he knew one thing for certain: Daisy had changed everything. And though her paws trod softly beside him, though her eyes gleamed with quiet strength, he could not shake the feeling that her time with him was part of something larger. Something that was not yet finished. Because what Daisy had given him so far, the strength to face the past, the courage to speak aloud the name of the boy, was only the beginning. Ahead still lay a truth he had not yet uncovered. A truth Daisy had been leading him toward since the very first night she pulled him to that gate. And soon, very soon, he would discover what that truth was. The days slipped into weeks, and Michael began to notice something he hadn't in years: life moving again. For so long, his world had been a narrow loop: the porch, the empty rooms, the occasional walk into town. Now, he found himself lingering in conversation with neighbors, letting the widow leave flowers on his porch without shutting the door too quickly. Even laughing, quietly, when Daisy chased butterflies across the garden. It startled him, this new pulse of living. It felt almost like betrayal, as though healing meant forgetting. But Daisy wouldn't allow forgetting. Every evening, when shadows stretched across the fields, she would stop at the edge of the path and look back at him with eyes that said, "There's more. Follow me." One such evening, Michael gave in. His cane tapped softly on the stones as he followed her out of the yard and toward the woods. The air was cooler beneath the trees, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Daisy led him steadily, never rushing, always pausing just enough to let him catch up. The path twisted deeper, narrower, until Michael began to wonder if even in his youth he'd ever walked this far. At last, they broke through the trees into a clearing. There, under the first light of the moon, stood the remains of an old chapel. The stone walls were crumbled, ivy curling thickly over the arches. The roof was long gone, and in its place the sky stretched wide, dark and endless. Daisy padded straight to the threshold and sat, waiting. Michael's breath caught. He hadn't seen this place in decades. He had been here once, as a boy. On a Sunday when the chapel still stood, the bells still rang. His parents had sat beside him on the hard wooden pews, their voices joining in hymns. It was here he had first believed there was something greater than the world before him. And it was here, years later, that belief had crumbled with the fire. Michael sank slowly onto a broken stone bench, his cane balanced across his knees. The silence around him was deep, yet not empty. Daisy lay at his feet, her gaze fixed on the altar, or what was left of it. "Why here?" he murmured, but the question was not to her. The moonlight shifted across the ruins, casting long shadows, filling the place with a kind of quiet reverence. For the first time in decades, Michael bowed his head. He didn't pray exactly. Not in the way he once had. But words came, halting and raw. "If you're still there, if you ever were, show me what to do with this." His voice trembled. The weight of 30 years pressed against him. The fire. The boy. The life he'd carried in silence, refusing forgiveness because he believed he didn't deserve it. Now, with Daisy resting like a sentinel, the ruins around him whispered of something else. Of broken things that still stood. Of lives scarred but not erased. And in the stillness, Michael felt it, faint but undeniable. A presence. Not thunderous. Not blinding. Just near. As though someone had been waiting all along. That night, Michael dreamt again. But not of fire, nor of loss. This time, he was in the chapel, whole and restored, the roof arched high above. Light streamed through tall windows, filling the space with gold. At the altar stood the boy. His eyes shone, no longer filled with fear. Beside him, Daisy waited, her tail wagging once in greeting. The boy stepped forward. His small hand reached for Michael's, steady and sure. "You can let go," he said. Michael's eyes burned as tears welled. And when Daisy barked, one clear sound, echoing through the dream, Michael felt the weight inside him shatter like glass. He woke gasping, clutching the sheets. His chest heaved, not with panic but with release. The room felt brighter somehow, though dawn had barely touched the sky. At the foot of the bed, Daisy raised her head, her eyes meeting his. They seemed to say, "It's done. You're free." Michael pressed both hands over his face, tears spilling hot and unrestrained. 30 years of guilt, 30 years of silence, broken. In the days that followed, Michael's world shifted further. He found himself talking with the widow often, sharing stories of his youth, his fears, even his failures. To his surprise, she never recoiled, never judged. Instead, she listened with the patience of someone who knew what it meant to carry invisible burdens. Neighbors noticed too. Michael smiled more, walked with less weight in his shoulders. Some even said it was as if the years had peeled back from his face. But always, Daisy was at the center of it. Wherever he went, she was there, steady, watchful, almost luminous. Yet, even as healing grew, Michael sensed something else stirring beneath the surface. One evening, as he stroked Daisy's fur by the fire, he noticed a faint tremor in her body. Her breathing heavier than usual. A flicker of fear shot through him. "Not yet," he whispered. "Don't you leave me yet." Daisy's eyes lifted to his, calm and unwavering. And in them, Michael read a truth deeper than words. "I am not leaving. I am leading." The distinction sent a chill through him. That night, for the first time in years, Michael prayed again, not out of desperation, but gratitude. "Thank you for sending her. For not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." And as he spoke, Daisy stirred, shifting closer, resting her head on his lap. Her body trembled again, faintly, but her eyes never wavered. Michael's hand stilled on her fur, his heart tightening. He realized then, Daisy's time was not endless. She had been sent for a purpose. And that purpose was nearly fulfilled. The thought filled him with dread and reverence at once. Because he understood now, Daisy had not simply wandered into his life. She had been placed. Every step she had taken, to the grave, to the chapel, into his dreams, had been guiding him toward this moment. Toward peace. Toward forgiveness. toward something far larger than grief. And soon, when her task was done, she would go. Not lost. Not gone. But return to wherever such beings came from. The realization broke him, yet it also made him whole. Michael leaned down, pressing his forehead against Daisy's. His voice trembled with love, fear, and surrender. "If you must go, then take my thanks with you. You saved me." Daisy licked his cheek, slow and deliberate, as though sealing a promise. And Michael knew, whatever came next, he would never again be the same man who carried his guilt in silence. He was free. And Daisy was more than a dog. She was the answer to a prayer he had long forgotten how to speak. The first frost of the season arrived quietly, glazing the fields in silver. Michael woke to the sight from his bedroom window, breath fogging the glass as he leaned close. Winter always used to press down on him, its gray skies, its reminders of endings. But this year, the frost looked almost beautiful. Almost like a beginning. At the foot of the bed, Daisy stirred. She rose slowly, more slowly than usual, her joints stiff, her breathing heavier. Michael's chest tightened. He had known this day would come. He had read it in her eyes for weeks now, the quiet preparing. Still, no preparation could blunt the sharp edge of fear. That afternoon, Daisy led him again toward the woods. The air was sharp, each breath tinged with the smell of pine and cold earth. Michael's cane tapped softly in rhythm with her slower steps. She guided him, not to the clearing this time, but further, deeper, where the trees grew taller and the ground fell hushed. At last, they reached a small meadow, open to the wide sky above. The grass shimmered with frost, the horizon glowing faintly gold with the setting sun. Daisy stopped in the center and lay down. Michael's breath caught. "No," he whispered, stumbling forward. "Not here. Not yet." But Daisy's eyes lifted to his, calm, unwavering, filled with the same quiet strength they had held since the day she arrived. And Michael understood. This was the place. He sank beside her, lowering himself onto the cold earth, heedless of the chill. His hands moved gently over her fur, feeling the rise and fall of her breath, slower now, each exhale a fragile cloud in the winter air. Memories tumbled through him, the first night she appeared on his porch, the grave she had led him to, the chapel, the dream of the boy, the healing that followed. Every step, every moment, had been a thread in a tapestry he hadn't seen until now. She hadn't come to stay. She had come to guide. To carry him from the prison of his grief into the light of forgiveness. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered, "You saved me. You were never just a dog, were you?" Daisy's eyes softened, as though in answer. And then, as the sun dipped lower, the meadow changed. The air shimmered, faint but real. The frost caught the last light, scattering it into 1,000 tiny stars. And in that glow, Michael saw him. The boy. Standing at the edge of the meadow, whole, smiling. No flames. No fear, only peace. Michael's heart stopped. His hands froze in Daisy's fur. The boy lifted a hand in greeting, his eyes bright with forgiveness that Michael had long believed impossible. And beside him, others. Faces Michael had loved and lost through the years. His parents. His brother. All waiting, all smiling with a warmth that seemed to erase the weight of time. But it was the boy's voice, clear and steady, that carried across the meadow. "It's time to let her go." Michael's sobs shook him, raw and unrestrained. He bent over Daisy, pressing his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for carrying me this far." Daisy's breath came one last time, long and steady, then stilled. Her body lay peaceful in the frost, her eyes closing as though into gentle sleep. Michael's hands trembled against her fur, but he felt it, a warmth lingering, not of the body but of something greater. And when he looked up again, Daisy was no longer lying beside him. She stood instead, golden and radiant, not in flesh but in light. Her form shimmered, luminous, her eyes brighter than ever. She looked at him one last time, not as a dog, but as a messenger, a guardian. Then, with a final wag of her tail, she turned and walked toward the boy. Together, they faded into the glow, until only the meadow remained. Michael sat in the silence, tears streaming, his body trembling with grief and wonder all at once. The air around him felt different, lighter, filled with presence. And in that silence, words rose within him, not from his own mind but from something beyond. You are not alone. You were never alone. When Michael finally stood, his joints aching, his cane unsteady, he felt something he had not in 30 years, strength. Not the strength of muscle or youth, but the strength of spirit. The meadow did not feel like a place of ending, but of promise. He looked once more at the spot where Daisy had lain, then turned back toward home. Each step felt less like leaving her behind, and more like carrying her forward. In the weeks that followed, Michael changed. He walked into town not just to buy bread, but to share conversation. He accepted invitations he had long refused. He sat in church again, in the very pew where his family once sat, and though the hymns caught in his throat, he sang them anyway. He tended the small grave in his yard with fresh flowers, but no longer with bitterness. Now, he whispered thanks. And every evening, when twilight stretched across the fields, he swore he saw her. Not clearly, not in flesh, but in the tilt of light on the path, in the brush of wind against his shoulder. Daisy was gone. But Daisy was not gone. She had led him home, not to the house, not to the land, but to himself. One night, as he sat by the fire, Michael closed his eyes and whispered, "If you're still near, thank you." And in the stillness, he felt it, a brush of warmth against his leg, the memory of fur, the echo of presence. He smiled through his tears. "Yes," he said softly. "You're still here." And with that, Michael leaned back in his chair, not into emptiness, but into peace. Because now he knew, love does not end. Love is the messenger. And Daisy had been love in its purest form. Winter deepened. The fields turned white, the air sharp and unforgiving. Yet Michael found, to his surprise, that he no longer dreaded the season. The silence of winter was no longer emptiness. It was fullness, a space where memories of Daisy lingered, not as sorrow, but as warmth. Each morning, he walked the path they once traveled. His cane struck the frozen earth, his breath hung in the air, and though the space beside him was empty, he felt her there. Sometimes, he paused at the meadow where she had left him. He would stand in stillness, his heart quiet, and feel it, a pulse of light, a whisper of presence. And he knew she was never truly gone. By spring, something inside Michael had shifted. He began tending the land with a vigor he hadn't felt in decades. He cleared the porch, patched the barn, planted a new garden. His neighbors noticed. The man who had once withdrawn from the world now moved with renewed purpose. At the town store, people who once whispered about his grief now greeted him with open smiles. And Michael, instead of averting his eyes, looked back. He spoke. He laughed. For the first time in 30 years, he rejoined the living. One afternoon, a boy from the village wandered up his drive, his clothes smudged with mud, his face streaked with tears. Michael recognized the look instantly, the look of someone who had lost something precious. "My dog ran off," the boy sniffled. "Mama says he's not coming back." Michael knelt, his old knees protesting, but his voice steady. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the ones we love don't stay." but they leave something with us. Something that doesn't ever go away." The boy's eyes lifted to his, wide with fragile hope. Michael placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and reassuring. And in that moment, Michael realized Daisy had not only healed him, she had prepared him to carry healing forward. The years unfolded with quiet grace. Michael became known in town not as the grieving recluse, but as the man who listened, the man who understood loss without judgment. People sought him out, widows, fathers, children, each carrying a burden, each leaving lighter than they came. He never preached. He simply shared. The story of a golden dog who had come to his door one night and refused to leave. Sometimes they smiled politely, thinking it a sweet tale. Sometimes they wept, sensing the truth woven in his words. And always, when they walked away, they carried a little more hope. The farmhouse itself changed too. Once quiet to the point of haunting, it became a place of welcome. Neighbors dropped by, children played in the fields, the old barn rang again with laughter. Michael would sit on the porch, cane across his knees, and watch them, life unfolding where once there had only been silence. And though he never said it aloud, he knew Daisy was there in every sound of joy, every spark of connection. One summer evening, Michael dreamed again. He stood once more in the meadow, bathed in golden light. The boy was there, smiling as before, but this time Daisy was not by his side. Instead, she stood behind Michael. He turned, startled, and saw her, luminous, radiant, watching over him. Not as a farewell this time, but as a companion. And in the dream, Michael understood something deeper. Daisy had never belonged to him. She had belonged to something greater, a love that moved through her into him, through him into others. She had been a messenger, yes. But more than that, she had been a mirror. She had reflected back to him the truth he had buried, that even in loss, life could still be love. When he woke, tears wet his cheeks. But for the first time, they were not tears of grief, but of gratitude. As the years passed, Michael grew older, slower, his hair thinning, his hands lined. Yet even as his body weakened, his spirit grew stronger. He had once feared age as another kind of loss, another slipping away. But now he saw it differently. Age was not subtraction. It was distillation. It was the slow refining of the soul. One autumn, sitting with a group of children on his porch, he told them, "Life is like walking a long path. Sometimes the way is bright, sometimes dark. Sometimes you're alone, sometimes you have company. But what matters most is not how fast you walk, or even how far. What matters is the love you carry with you. That's what lights the way." The children listened, their eyes wide, their young hearts storing the words for years they didn't yet understand. And Michael smiled, because he knew Daisy's work was still alive. On the final winter of his life, Michael sat again by the fire. The snow lay thick outside, the world hushed. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm ready." And in the quiet, he felt it, the brush of fur against his leg, the warmth of presence at his side. When he opened his eyes, the room was filled with golden light. And there she was. Daisy. Not as the old dog who had once limped into his yard, but as she truly was, radiant, eternal, a being of pure love. She leaned her head against him, just as she had that very first night. Michael's eyes closed, his breath slowed, and with a smile softening his face, he let go. In the morning, the villagers found him sitting peacefully in his chair by the fire, a gentle smile on his face. And though the room was empty, more than one swore they felt it, a warmth, a presence, a whisper of fur brushing by. They buried him on the hillside overlooking the fields, beside the stone where he had laid Daisy's body years before. And when the first frost came again that year, those who passed by the farmhouse said they saw it. Two figures walking the path together. One tall, leaning on a cane. One golden, tail wagging. Both radiant in the morning light. Michael's story did not end with his last breath. It lived on, in the children he taught, in the neighbors he comforted, in the strangers who carried his words home like lanterns in the dark. And always, woven through it all, was Daisy. The messenger. The guide. The light. She had led him from grief into grace, from sorrow into love, and from love into eternity. And now, together, they walked on. Stories, if they are true, never really end. They ripple outward, carried in whispers, in memories, in the quiet way they shape lives long after the characters are gone. Michael's story was one such story. After his passing, the farmhouse remained. Weathered, simple, standing on its hill as it always had. Yet it was no longer just a place of solitude. It had become something more, a symbol, a living reminder. Neighbors would pause on their walks to look up at it, feeling a pull they couldn't explain. Children, now grown, told their own little ones about the kind old man who had once sat on that porch, cane across his knees, smile soft as a sunrise. And always, in their retelling, there was a golden dog. Over time, the tale of Daisy took on its own life. Some spoke of her as a faithful companion, others as a miracle. Some whispered she was an angel, sent to heal a heart cracked wide with grief. But no matter how the details shifted, one truth remained steady. Daisy had carried light where there had been only shadow. She had turned loss into love. And perhaps that is what every true companion, human or animal, is sent here to do. For those who grieved, Michael's story became a balm. A widow who had lost her husband of 50 years found courage in the thought that love could return in unexpected forms. A young man mourning his father discovered comfort in the idea that bonds never die, they only change shape. And countless others, hearing the story for the first time, felt their hearts lift, if only a little. The beauty was not that Daisy had erased Michael's grief. She had not. The beauty was that she had walked beside him through it, showing him that grief itself could become a kind of doorway, a passage not into despair, but into a deeper, softer kind of love. And so the story spread, not with fanfare, but like roots beneath the soil, quietly, invisibly, nourishing everything it touched. In the quiet of winter, when the frost gleamed on the hills, some swore they saw them still. A man with a cane. A dog of light. Walking together through the fields, their figures dissolving into dawn. Perhaps it was only imagination. Perhaps it was something more. But whether real or whispered, the vision carried its own message. Love does not leave. It transforms. It travels with us, through seasons, through lifetimes, beyond the edge of breath itself. And maybe that is why this story matters, not because it belongs to Michael alone, but because, in a way, it belongs to all of us. Every heart knows loss. Every soul has felt the ache of absence. But every heart also holds within it the possibility of light, the chance that love, once given, never truly fades. It only changes its form. Sometimes it returns as a memory that warms us in the night. Sometimes as a dream that leaves us with peace instead of sorrow. Sometimes as a stranger, a friend, a child, or even a dog, who steps into our life at exactly the moment we need them most. That is the mystery. That is the gift. When people asked Michael, in his later years, what Daisy had meant to him, he never gave long speeches. He would simply smile and say, "She reminded me that love is stronger than death." And isn't that the truth we all crave? Not that pain will never come, but that pain is never the end. Not that we won't lose, but that what we lose still walks with us, still shapes us, still waits for us on the other side of silence. So perhaps tonight, as you sit in your own quiet, you might think of Michael. You might think of Daisy. And perhaps you'll feel something stir within you, a memory of someone you've loved and lost. A parent, a partner, a friend. Maybe even a beloved animal, whose paws once echoed across your floor. For a moment, let yourself feel it fully. Not as sharp pain, but as presence. As a warmth that still lives inside you. Because love does not leave. It transforms. It walks beside us. And sometimes, when we least expect it, it shows up again, in a dream, in a stranger, in a wagging tail at the door. In the end, Michael and Daisy's story is not about endings at all. It is about continuity. About the threads of love that weave through every life, binding us together across time, across form, across even the veil we call death. And if you carry nothing else from this story, carry this. Your love has not been lost. Your beloved is not gone. They walk with you still. Maybe not in the way you once knew, but in a way just as real, just as eternal. And one day, whether in a dream, or in the light that greets us when we close our eyes for the last time, you will see them again. Michael once said, near the very end of his life, "We don't lose love. We learn to recognize it in new shapes. And when our journey is over, we discover it was never far from us at all." Those who heard him never forgot the words. And maybe now, neither will you. So tonight, let Michael and Daisy's story settle into your heart. Let it remind you of what you already know, deep down. That love is eternal. That grief is not the end. That every bond, once woven, lasts forever. And that somewhere, just beyond the horizon of what we can see, someone you have loved still walks beside you, waiting, guiding, smiling. Always.